I have always wanted to tell my life story. It was my motivation, my passion, at a very young age when I had already experienced so much. I was a year out of beating cervical cancer, and it was then I realized I needed to tell my story. I needed to show my story. A month later, I joined film school. I replayed my entire life story, and I realized in 2.5 years of film school that I had a lot of questions. Who was I as an indigenous woman? How will I pass my Tlingit heritage through blood when I can't have babies? How will my story live on? I grew up a very cultural life. Life was surrounded by Tlingit traditions. The biggest tradition I remember every year was the hooligan run in the springtime. It's a process of making hooligan oil, dried or smoked hooligan. The process takes a couple weeks, and it is surrounded by lots of gathering of family and friends, long nights and days. It's a sort of tradition that kicks off the year, after all we come out of the winter months of isolation. Right before the hooligan come the herring. They would arrive, and we generally would spend a few days harvesting for bait, for other harvests. But in the recent years, they have ran the same time as the hooligan have. Once the hooligan and the herring run is over, everything else follows. Crab harvesting, halibut fishing and gathering, salmon harvesting, berry harvesting, deer hunting, and then we enter back into the winter months, where a lot of otter and seal harvesting occurs. Growing up, I faced a lot of trauma, and because of that, I made a lot of choices that led me down a path of destruction. I partied hard, made bad choices, and those bad choices followed by more bad choices. I dug myself a pretty deep hole. To the point when I finally wanted out, I had a very small support system and community that doubted I could do it. Unfortunately, I feel this is something a lot of teens and young adults face in villages, especially in the harsh seasons of Alaska, when you're left with not a whole lot to do as far as activities, other than cultural activities. Because of the hole I dug myself, I was constantly reminded of who I was or what mistakes I had made, not who I could be or wanted to be. So I felt the best thing I could do for myself was leave Haines. I decided to move to Juneau. Juneau is 90 miles from Haines, and just like Haines, it's only accessible by boat or plane. Haines does have a road out, but it's through Canada, and if you're like me, you're not allowed in Canada. Once I left Haines, I started healing and finding myself. I started becoming a person others doubted I could be. I found a good support system and started in the career in the dental field. I was healing, piecing together all my relationships, and discovering who I was, and become the person I always wanted to be, but never imagined I would be. Most of all, I fell in love with the person I was, and forgave who I used to be. After that, everything sort of just fell into place. I met the love of my life, made a beautiful life with him, and now I have 2 cats, fishies, and I even gained a wonderful stepson. I fought hard to get where I am today, but there has always been something missing. It was like something was lost, and I didn't know what it was, where I should look, or how I even to get back this feeling of completeness. I had no idea what it was at first. In fact, I didn't even know what it was for a couple of years. I was so focused on getting myself better that I didn't pay attention to anything else. It was after having cervical cancer and joining film school that I realized what it was that was lost. My cultural identity was lost. Everything about me is non-traditional, and my family has always done things a little non-traditional in some aspects. But that doesn't change who we are, our heritage, or who our ancestors are, or the land we live on. I do not have a Tlingit name. I am not part of a clan or house. But I know I am Tlingit, and my entire childhood and teenage years was surrounded by culture. My dad made sure that it was ingrained in me and my brother. So even though I didn't have the simple things that most can say, I've always known I'm Tlingit. And even though I'm a quarter, I have always felt in my heart and soul I was 100% Tlingit. Traditions, stories, and the mythology of Tlingit culture are some of my favorite things about being Tlingit. Growing up, many of my favorite memories are from traditions my family did, and the stories surrounding those traditions. Those memories are what got me through my hard times, and the stories are what I hung on to. I constantly would reminisce. I don't know if it was for the things to be like that again, or if it was just the happiness. but those stories and memories were my light during the dark times. Living in Haines, everyone knew who I was. Everyone knew my family, and everyone knew I was Tlingit. Living in Juneau, no one knows who I am, and I can remember the first time so vividly when I was asked if I was Native because of the tattoo on my neck. When I said, yes, I am Tlingit, they looked at me and said, wow, I didn't realize you don't look Native at all with your blue eyes and fair skin. Since then, I have been questioned a couple times, and that pushed me more over the edge, and I really started to question my cultural identity. I no longer felt like I belonged. I essentially felt like an outcast and lost. Juneau has been a blessing in many ways, but it has definitely had its setbacks. Being in a new community where I don't know many people, a place where things are not done the same, it makes you lose that closeness to culture. In Haines, doing something cultural was just a short drive or a phone call away. Here in Juneau, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what I would do. In Haines, it was a lot of subsistence and gathering aspect of culture. Not so much the crafting aspect, for me anyway, which is what I would consider weaving, carving, sewing, or regalia making. After I got cervical cancer, I had a lot of emotions and questions. My biggest one was, how will I pass my bloodline down? How will I pass my knowledge, my heritage now that I can't have babies? How will I tell my story? How will my story be passed? How will it be heard? Since I can remember, I have been obsessed with telling my story, my life story. I have so much to share with others who have been where I have been. I want to be that hand, that light at the end of the tunnel that I didn't have for others. At first I thought I will write books with a secret name, as I would get nervous every once in a while about being vulnerable. But then I thought, that's not good enough. I need to have a voice, and I need to be heard for those who don't have a voice, and it clicked. I'll be a filmmaker. I will show and I will tell the world my story. And a month later, I joined film school. 2 years into film school, and I was having a lot of self-reflection. I've endured a lot of trauma, though I also have a lot of great memories and lessons learned. One thing I've realized is that I didn't know my place in Tlingit culture anymore, and I didn't know what it meant to be a Tlingit, or what my role was in the culture anymore. And those were questions that I used to have an answer to when I was young, because filmmaking has made me question so much about who I am, who I'm going to be as a filmmaker, and where I want to take these films and documentaries. It was filmmaking that made me realize how to find my identity again. All these questions stirred in my mind. It wasn't until I started thinking of what kinds of documentaries will I do after school? How will I make money to help support my family and self? In the recent months, I had to come up with a capstone project, which is a project that I would work on for roughly 6 months until graduation. I thought about all these questions I had related to culture, and it all hit me at once as I reminisced. Tlingit culture, my story in Tlingit culture, my story. I thought to myself, what if I document my journey in Tlingit and finding who I am as an Indigenous woman? Taking the world on a journey in self-discovery in beautifully rich Indigenous culture, all while telling my story past and present. So I started studying and figuring out as much as possible. I started studying the history, studying different crafts, researching the history of the traditions, reaching out to other Tlingits. I started figuring out what I wanted to do, what I wanted to learn, how to make a button blanket, a drum, learn the language, learn form line. Each thing I wanted to learn steered me towards something else I needed to learn in order to do the one thing. I have to learn form line to make a design for my button blanket and drum. I have to make a drum to sing and dance with my button blanket. I have to learn the language so I can sing, beat my drum, and dance with a button blanket. And so I started my journey in self-discovery, learning who I was as a Tlingit, gaining my cultural identity back, and learning my role in the culture. Learning I was a storyteller. I am a Tlingit storyteller.
My name is Angela Williams, and I am Tlingit.